Sick.
All right, everybody, welcome to today's episode of We As Start Talking. I am Gareth, your host for this evening. And I just wanted to first of all say thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in to this episode. If this is your first one, awesome. Great to have you here. If you've been listening for a while, even better. So thank you so much. Just want to give a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into the episode today. So please, if you haven't already subscribed, make sure that those episodes hit your inbox. You know when they're there. We're released every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We really appreciate that. Please, if you like it, if you learn something, if there's something interesting, share it with your network, put it on social media. You know how to do the thing. Just get it out there because it makes a massive difference. And, we stand by changing the world one conversation at a time, and you help us to do that. So please get on that. You can also support the show by heading over to our Patreon account, which is patreon.com/start talking, and you'll see all the tiers for membership. You can jump in and you can just support the show so we can continue to bring you amazing content. So that is the intro. Without further ado, I want to welcome Mario Rigby to the show today. Mario, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really blessed, man. I'm good. How are
Sweet.
you? How's everything?
Good, Matty. I'm really good. It's been a quite a fun, action-packed day of lots of stuff going on. So yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation to kind of wrap it all up. So I'm going to do a little bit of an intro, tell all the listeners out there a little bit about, I guess, where we connected, and then a little bit about Mario, and then he's going to dig into some just a fascinating, going to say story, but fascinating stories as well. So Mario is I'm Eco Explorer is the title that I find on all your channels. So I kind of like that, and we're going to dig into what that is. But expeditions and going out there and doing these challenges and being out there in the nature, if you like, and in the world, and kind of connecting all those things together. And I know there's some amazing stuff you're going to be talking about, so I'm not going to go on too much about that. And also an athlete by all sense of the word. So, representing your country internationally, 200 and 400 meters. I remember some of those stories from back when we worked together, which is how we first connected, and just kind of hearing a little bit about that, and also just seeing how that kind of came through in what you did. And obviously that's led you on to something that's very physically challenging, and, in many aspects as well, and many of the things that you do. So I'm super keen to hear about that. And quite honestly, I think here's a great spot to me to hand the mic to you so you can tell us, probably do a better job of introducing yourself than I did. So away you go.
No, I think you did a great job, and I think people need to know that we knew each other like a decade ago, and we go way back when I think we were starting to really build up our careers, and we were trying to work on that. And I wanted to be a personal trainer because I was coming from a background of sports, and as you knew too, I kind of started to focus on sports and conditioning, and then I just kind of like dropped that whole industry altogether, because I just felt like I also really loved adventure and exploration, and so I wanted to figure out how can I merge the two together. And actually the love of adventure didn't just come out of nowhere. I was actually raised in Germany. I lived there for about 10 years of my life, and so my father, my stepfather, was in the military, and so he had a very good understanding of survival, being in the outdoors. And so of course he would take his his little kids out, and that's me and my brother, and we would go on these like really long epic adventures, and that was our family time. And moving back to the Caribbean where I was born, in Turks and Caicos Islands, there's now this like new, like incredible diverse landscape that I had like previously never even known existed. So it just kind of like shocked my system into like a new environment, into a new world. And then of course shortly after I moved to Canada, and of course that's another environment. So I was like constantly shifting from one place to the next, but I always had family close, my mom, my brother, my stepfather for half the time. And so of course there was always that love and support while we were doing all these things. And no surprise, sooner or later you're gonna want to explore the world and explore more of what this wonderful place has to offer.
Yeah, it's quite the journey of places, and it definitely resonates with me. I've moved around a fair bit in my life, and for different reasons. We moved around a lot as kids, kind of within England where I grew up, and then kind of off all over the place, living, in Canada and New Zealand and back in Canada, and just kind of again exploring, right? And I think it's even just the what you see and what you can experience, but a lot of that, and I'm sure this will resonate with you as well, the culture difference and just how much we learn about. And I know we're going to get into some of the topics that we've discussed previously, but I just think that the world we live in, the more exposed we are to the diversity and culture in living in other countries and traveling and going on, these big adventures and whatever it is it opens us up mentally to what's out there. And I just think that goes such a great way to be more inclusive because we see it and we understand it. And I'm sure you've seen that, in many different forms, probably positive and negative on your travels.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and you know what, you're hitting the nail on the coffin on that one because, just having exposure to the diversity that's going around in the world, I think really opened up my eyes and my heart to accepting these different cultures. So, really, what got me into starting with exploration was, and it's going to be funny to a lot of people, but it's true, which is, me and my brother, we watched a show called The Black Panther. And when we were kids, it was a TV show, but now obviously it's a movie. But before it was a movie, no one had really understood or heard, what the Black Panther was in the Marvel kind of sector. And we we really loved him because he was this king and he was a black king and he was a superhero, which made it like really like awe-inspiring for my brother and myself because there weren't any other black superheroes at that level, who basically ran an entire nation. And in one of the episodes, he actually he decided to go on a walkabout around Africa because he thought that it's important for him to learn about his environment, about his surroundings. And throughout his experience, he got robbed, he fell in love with someone, he got into all this trouble. But throughout this trouble, he also saw all the beauty. So he saw the extremes. He saw the extremes of the end of the spectrum and the other end of the spectrum in terms of good and bad. And I think since a kid, I've always resonated with that. I've always thought, like, wow, how wonderful would that be to go explore Africa in the most, insane possible way, which is by foot because it's so incredibly slow. But you have no way of getting out of a bad situation or a good situation. You're kind of like forced to go through it. And that really kind of starts to shape your adventure. It's not you shaping the adventure, it's the adventure itself shaping you. And that's kind of what I was looking for.
Yeah, that it's so. I love that, and it kind of links in actually to a conversation I was having earlier today on another episode. And like you said, it forces you to kind of be in it and absorb it and take it all in. And we were actually, the conversation I was having earlier was about emotional regulation.
Mhm.
However, it just links so well to that because we often go through this journey of life and we don't sit in things and absorb them and accept them, and it kind of, I don't know, it kind of parallels with that. So I love to hear that kind of take and that understanding of the journey. So for the listeners, you kind of picked up there about the walk through Africa. So let's hear a little bit about. And I love that story. And Black Panther is epic movie. By the way, if you haven't seen it, check it out. Yeah, tell us a little bit about your own journey in
Hmm.
off of that initial kind of inspiration.
Yeah. So when I started, researching, like, are there any Black explorers out there? I found perhaps a few people that were Black explorers. I think one of them, I forgot her name, but she was an astronaut, and she had gone out into space, the first Black woman to go out into space. And then when she came back to Earth, like, how many people can say, "Oh, when I came back to Earth," just incredible.
Awesome.
When she came back to Earth, she decided to climb Mount Everest. And so those were people that I could look up to who were, going through similar situations that I kind of went through. And when I say similar situations, I'm talking about, the history of the entire slave trade, for the West African crossing the Atlantic slave trade. We all kind of essentially came from the same boat. But anyways, I'm going too far off. I tend to do that a lot. But going back to current reality, I started to look up, who's really exploring, and I found that there weren't anyone that looked like me. And so I thought this is an even better opportunity, chance for me to do something that's quite unique. And what that was to go to Africa, as a black man and experience it by walking and having people really, look at me and not be like, oh, this guy can give handouts or anything like that. But I wanted them to I wanted to be a level, like one-on-one level with them. I wanted to be in a situation where I would actually have to call for help. And that happened quite a lot, throughout my experience, particularly in the beginning of my Africa journey. There were a lot of times where you're faced kind of with, like you're in a remote place and you're so vulnerable, and the only people that can really help you are, the indigenous people who are living around you. And so you're forced to learn how to communicate with them. If you don't, then you're is surely going to perish soon enough. So for me, I had to literally learn a kind of this universal language of communication. And I think a lot of people think that, well, it's impossible to go to these places because you don't speak the same language. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think we all have a common understanding about essential needs that we all have, like water, food, sleep, shelter, security, all those different things. And I was able to communicate that with them. But what Africa really did to me, and I could talk about the thousands of different stories that happen in Africa, and I will later on. But what Africa really did to me was open up my eyes, on how incredibly hospitable these people were. And then that made me reflect about, okay, well, where am I from in the Western world, and how do we treat each other? Throughout my entire journey in Eastern Africa, I never stepped over a homeless person. I never witnessed seeing a homeless person because everyone was somehow taken care of. They believe in this philosophy called Ubuntu, where it's like all for one and one for all, where they all care for each other. It's a communal way of thinking, very matriarchal actually. And thinking back to how we see things in the West, we're constantly racing towards something that gives us self-fulfillment in a way, but then leaves out our community, which means our neighbors, our friends. And we're willing to step over homeless people, and that's something that we've all done, including myself. And so it really made me reflect on, like, are the things that we're doing in the West the best possible way of doing it? And if not, then how can we recalibrate ourselves and move forward in humanity in a way that we can care for each other, but not just for the sake of caring for each other like a kumbaya, but more so for the for the continued evolution of humanity. Because then that means we also have to take care of our environment. We have to take care of the species around us. And so I believe like the first part of my Africa walk taught me a lot of these lessons. But it also taught me the lessons of the stark reality. And that means like seeing some of the most like insane things that I can't even really talk about too much on here, otherwise I might go back to jail. But in terms of like secrecies and things like that, I'm not really allowed to share. But I've met people like leaders who have done atrocities where tens of thousands of people have been massacred. And I was faced to I was in one of those situations where I had to be friends with one of these people, because it was either going to be befriend this person or I'm going to be in big trouble.
Yeah.
And seeing their behavior and seeing how they see other Africans um really made me kind of rethink, like, wow, what is evil? Like, what is evil and what isn't? But a lot of these people, a lot of these leaders are fooled to believe that accumulation of wealth is the way to be in power. And the people who've picked that up, unfortunately, are the leaders. They've picked up the Western way of looking at what is right and wrong, and how can I rightfully be a leader. Of course, this is not like an entire blame on the West. There's a lot of great things, I think, in our civilization here that has brought us prosperity through health and longevity in life and all these different things. But I think what we've lost really is connection, and that's something that I found throughout my journey in Africa.
Yeah, and that is just huge. That you said a few important words: the connection, the community. And obviously we go full circle back around to being in and embracing culture and differences, and that's so fundamental. Whether that's the, like you said, there's no homeless people because everyone's building that community, they're staying together. And although we may approach that differently in the Western world, it's trying to find those things. And that's a lot of what we do with this podcast: is how do we build a community around that? How do we get involved with organizations that build a community, and having these conversations, because that in itself creates that connection. And our hope is that everyone listening is going to hear something that's going to resonate, that they're going to take away. And as you said, it's going to help that evolution of
Exactly.
the species.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge, man. So
Yeah.
when let's I'm gonna love to hear some more about those kind of the stories, the ones you can tell. But
Mm.
just so, because I want to know selfishly, and I'm sure the listeners are dying to know. So where exactly did you walk from and to? Because I'm super intrigued.
Yeah. So I began my expedition in South Africa, Cape Town. I wanted to start in the most southern tip of Africa. So I actually started in a place called Cape Point, which is the most southwestern point of Africa. And then I moved along the eastern coast of South Africa all the way to Mozambique, my second country, through Mozambique, halfway along the coast, and then moved inland toward Malawi, where Malawi, I decided to actually kayak the entire length of Lake Malawi, because Lake Malawi actually follows the length of Malawi all the way from south to north. So I figured, okay, why not do something even harder than walking?
Yeah.
Which at the time I really regretted, but now it's actually quite wonderful that I did that. And from Malawi, I crossed the border into Tanzania, where I remembered I contracted malaria, cerebral malaria, which is the worst kind that you can possibly get. And I received that right after I crossed the border into Tanzania. So I was out for at least a month. And from Tanzania, I continued up to Kenya, Ethiopia, Sudan, and then finally in Cairo, Egypt.
Jeez, that's it, you can't even. It's hard to even fathom. And I've seen your journey and your posts, and just I think about it sometimes when I see stuff that you put up, and I'm like, you can't. I don't even think you can fathom the enormity of that. And I like the way you just like, oh, I just thought I'd kayak through this bit. It's funny. And there's actually a really cool. So just the listeners will be able to see all your social links and stuff in the show notes. But it you can go on there and see that amazing. There's that amazing video of you. If you're kayaking, you're in a boat. I think you are kayaking anyway. So go check that out, because I was quite fascinated by that and the whole kind of message behind it, which is awesome. So that's quite a big undertaking. Now, when you did that, was there? It sounds like you had the plan to walk this route. Clearly, you didn't plan to get malaria or anything else like that. How much kind of structure was there to it? Like, was it just kind of, I'm gonna walk, and when I'm tired, I'll find somewhere to sleep, or was it a bit more structured than that? And
Right. I mean, that's a good question, because going into it, I actually, I knew that obviously there's going to be some situations in which it's going to be out of my control. I even thought that there are going to be times where I would go off route, and I did actually. Originally I was supposed to go through Zimbabwe and Zambia as well, but instead I decided to veer east and stay along Mozambique. If you're you might have to pull out a map to really get that idea, that sense. And the reason I didn't go through, I originally didn't want to go through Mozambique, because I knew that there was a conflict going on, a conflict in which I actually somehow got involved in.
oh, good.
And it's really crazy. Halfway through, I ended up getting picked up by the military, because they said, no, it's impossible. You cannot walk through a conflict zone. So, essentially they kind of kidnapped me, forced me into the back of a convoy truck, of which I missed about 100 kilometers of distance right there. But at this point, like you're not really counting those little distances. And so I was forced in this convoy truck, and all of a sudden we got shot at by rebels, and it was probably the most frightening experience I've ever had. I mean, me, like, I come from Toronto. We don't have these experiences. This is not our reality.
Yeah.
So, so like, try to picture yourself in the back of a truck being shot at by rebel soldiers who are coming out from the bush. And the truck stops, and I'm thinking, like, why the hell are we stopping? And the soldiers come out of the truck, they start firing back into the bush where these guys were, and all of a sudden, I think it was about 15, 20 minutes long, and all of a sudden it comes to my head that, like, I should probably jump out of this the back of this pickup truck, because before we even arrived there, we saw a bunch of cars on the side of the road that were blown up. So I thought consciously in my head that I really need to get out of here. But before I did that, I actually ended up taking out my phone and started recording the entire event, which is now actually up live on YouTube.
Jeez.
Because I wanted people to know, like, the reality of what's going on right here and then. So because I had friends that were before me who wanted to visit Mozambique, and I told them, like, listen, do not come through this particular area. There's an actual war going on. And so that was my kind of first real experience of, like, the worst of what humanity could possibly throw at you.
Yeah.
So those are one of those situations where I was derailed, and I really couldn't, I could not have predicted that things like that would have happened. Like, the amount of times that I survived the situation, I honestly, I'm probably the luckiest person alive, because there are a lot of situations in which, in fact, it would probably even be luckier if I wasn't alive in some situations.
Yeah.
Like walking across the desert in the White Desert in Sudan, where I had to cross from one village to the other. That took me about a week and a half, close to 2 weeks. And I was walking with a herd of camel farmers, because what they do is they'll get hundreds of camels from one village over to the other, crossing, which is what is part of the Sahara Desert, from one end to the other. And what you do is you pay one of the camel herders $1,000 USD, and that's the one that's going to carry all your water. It's not carrying you; it's carrying the water.
Yeah.
And you hardly ever see this camel, because you're walking ahead, and what they do is, by the time you're resting at night, they're catching up, because they're moving at a little bit slower pace. And every day I hope that I am not lost. I hope I don't go the wrong direction, because if it's just one mishap, you're essentially screwed. And there were times where I did go a little bit too far ahead, where I missed about a whole day of water. So that really frightened me. And those were kind of situations where it really tests you, what kind of character you are. Are you someone that is going to continue going even though, like, death is imminent, and you have about like, literally you can see the timeline of your life going away. You have about 8 hours left, otherwise you'll die from dehydration? Or are you the kind of person who's going to get up and continue going, even though it's hard, even though it's easier to die at this point than to continue going? So there were a lot of these situations where I thought to myself, um, you know, the best thing to do when planning these routes is to have a very, very, very open mind. But at the same time, my structure was, I just need to make it to Egypt entirely by human powered propulsion, right? By walking or by kayaking. And the kayaking portion, I did about 550 kilometers of that. But the rest is, like, the end goal was just to make it to Cairo, Egypt. And everything else is a beautiful, like, kind of story that T'Challa from King of Wakanda experienced as well.
Yeah. So what's the
So it's like a very simple I was gonna say, it's like a very simple route, but the sophistication of which you need to go through that route, I think is magnificent. It's just like all the different experiences that you get from a single straight line from point A to point B.
yeah? What is the what's the actual distance in kilometers that you did?
Um, so I don't specifically know the exact distance. Because we're looking, there were times in like Sudan, I I just at one point I just stopped recording like specific distances, but altogether 12,000 kilometers. So it could be like 11,500, or it could be 13,000,
Yeah.
something like that. Sorry, not 13,000. It could be 12,000 500 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's within that range.
Jeez, that's yeah, that's quite the distance, and that puts it into some perspective, right? Like you think about, people listening, you go out for 30 minutes and walk your dog, and you maybe get 3 to 5 kilometers. So it just gives you some perspective on what that would look like in a sense of time, and how far, and all the things that kind of come up to that. So a couple of things that I was kind of just thinking over, and a couple of questions. Number one, I just want to go back to Mozambique and the whole like rebel fire and everything else like that. One thing that, and I'm very fortunate, I will hold my hands up. I live a massively privileged life. I live in a safe little town. Um, I've also I grew up in England. I then lived in Canada. I'm a white male, so I'm pretty privileged as they go, and I'm fairly safe. And I've done fairly safe things my whole life, in regards to physically, anyway. Maybe some other stupid decisions I've made, but how does how do you even process that? I mean, and what's the one thing that goes through your mind? Are you present in that moment? Are you in the past? Are you in the future? Like and you said it was like 15 minutes, so that's a whole lot of thinking time. Probably didn't feel like it, but yeah, what are you thinking about at that time?
So it depends on the journey. So at the beginning, I was really processing a lot of the experiences that I've had in the past, like relationships, kind of like unmending these like relationships in a sense in my head, because I remember like, going through like massive breakup and things like that. And, I guess it wasn't really completely over in my head. And I didn't even realize that until you have about 10 hours of time alone. And when you're meditating for about a month, you really start to go into your mind. And what happened was I started to uncomb all of the knots that were kind of in my mind, right? So as you're kind of uncombing these knots in your head, what's happening is it's a painful experience, just like when you're combing the knots in your hair. And you keep kind of pulling on it gently, and it hurts and it hurts. And then eventually you get through. And when you get through, then you're thinking, well, what now can I think of? I've already thought about, I went through therapy in my own head with, my estranged father, with, with my ex, and, relationships that I thought were a little bit toxic, and including myself, even relationships with myself. So once you start to go through that, then new experiences come about, which is, well, now it's time to. And I remember actually that the very moment where I felt like incredibly present. I was no longer thinking about the past, wasn't really thinking about the future. I remember that one time, and it's just like completely present. And it was just one of the happiest moments of my life, where, and I believe I was near the big, like, this was like midway through South Africa. Sorry, midway through Mozambique. Sorry, not where the rebels were. Like, just a little bit, just FYI. But it was before that, and because there I started to have this routine that was really packed down, and I started to think, like, instead of thinking, "Oh, I'm walking to Egypt," I started to think, "Well, this is my job. I'm gonna wake up in the morning just like everybody else, but instead of like, going in this direction, I'm just going in this completely straight direction all the time. All I'm doing is moving north continuously." And that's the difference between, and to me it seemed like a very minor difference between someone who is waking up, early in the morning and going to work to do their thing. For me, it was just more a way that people probably aren't used to. When you go to work, you're faced with new challenges every day, at least if you have a very stimulating, challenging job. And so that's kind of how I saw it. And that's what makes you continue to go, not looking at the far future, and Like I never thought in my head, like, oh boy, like I got about, 11,900, sorry, 11,900 steps left to go to Egypt. I kept thinking in my head, like, oh, okay, well, what's the next city or what's the next village I'm gonna go to? Like that's exciting. It's like, whoa, okay, I'm gonna go to to these Humba tribe village. What are they like? And then I would do some research on that. I had my cell phone and my smartphone, which was connected well throughout Africa, actually. And I would do my research and I would be like, okay, cool, the Himba tribe, the Hama tribe, the Maasai people, and that's what really kept me interested going day to day. It was really like a really cool anthropological study, but on foot. And so that's kind of how I entertained myself. In fact, to keep myself even going, I sometimes made it so it's not just like just about me. I started to record and do interviews with people who are doing incredible things in Africa. So that actually started to get me interested in venturing out even further. So I would take like bigger detours, which I would be happy to sacrifice 150 kilometers of extra walking to make sure that I get this incredible story of people doing incredible things in Africa for Africans. And then I really started to get into that. And that really gets you now more involved with the local people. And that's how I got, hooked up with, the president of Sierra Leone and the first lady, although this is West Africa, but long story, but let's just say the connection happened somehow.
Yeah.
And you start to get, into really in-depth experiences with African people. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I kept myself busy. That's one. Two is I became very present with what was going on. I actually listened to a lot of podcasts, believe it or not, on people who like spiritual kind of podcasts. I think Alan Watts, he was one of them. I listened to like a lot of Buddhist thinking, not necessarily in a religious sense, but more of a looking at Buddhism as a theory and philosophy, a way of looking at life. Because I realized that as I was walking, it had that sense, it had that feeling of Buddhist mentality, which is, everything is like tangible yet untangible, you know, and you can only survive if you're okay with those thoughts and if you're okay with that. If you weren't, I can definitely say within 2.5 years you can go crazy if you don't have this like light sense of yourself while you're doing this very heavy thing.
Yeah, absolutely, and I love some of those philosophies. It's super interesting, and kind of makes me think about it kind of comes back to that present moment, like you were saying, right? And having to let go of control, because you walking, the length of Africa, you got to let go, like you said, of a lot of that control. How does
Mhm.
your and that's really great to hear, and I think that some of that solitude in that is an eye-opening experience. Like you said, it's kind of like a very long meditation, which some people I'm sure will laugh about, thinking they probably struggle to do 5 minutes of meditation, and you're doing 10 hours on a stretcher walk, for example. But how
Yeah,
does that
well,
how does that change? How does your mindset change when, so you mentioned about, like, being involved in Rebel Fire, you mentioned, walking through the desert and, having that day without water, and I'm assuming that a lot of fear sets in at that point. Otherwise you're not human, getting a gunshot at you. But how does that change the mindset? So that ability to be present and that ability to keep going and, like you said, keep busy and make that kind of routine. Like, how did that? And it may have only been a short amount of time, but how did that mindset shift, and how did you get back on track?
yeah, so going off track, I believe going off track was kind of difficult. The longest I've ever gone off track was probably, I would say, 3 months, and that was in Tanzania. And that's after I had malaria. That it really derailed me, I would say, big time, because I just came back from Malawi. I had kayaked the entire length. It took me 2.5 months, and I was shot at by rebels. Before that time, so it was just a lot of things accumulated. And then also throughout Malawi, I was arrested a bunch of times, And at one point, even I would say like a light torture where they put shackled handcuffs on me for a number of days.
Jesus.
And it was really like it was just humiliating how they treated me in that way. They didn't believe that I'm from from Canada or anything like. They were like, it was just like one of those villages where, and I actually ran into a lot of these villages where basically, and I'll get back to your point real quick, um, where there was a lot of superstition, and people would, it just depending on if you smile at them too much, or if you just do one thing off that will like trigger their superstition of you, then that's who you are, and there's nothing you really you can do about it. And it happened like maybe a couple of times out of 100 times that I've the 100 different villages that I've encountered throughout Africa. And so I knew that was going to happen. I just lucky that I didn't do anything like crazy, like burn me to the stake or anything like that. But it was hard for them to believe that there's actually such thing as a black man who is free in the West doing the things that I'm doing. And so that's usually the reason why they couldn't believe what I was doing. It's like, no way. Like we've been told that we are like, subservient to the white man kind of thing. So what kept me going really was, trying to prove them wrong, particularly just for that reason alone, just to show that like, listen, I'm going to survive this, and when I survive this I'll tell the story. And that was enough for me to want to stay alive. I wanted to tell the story. I was more embarrassed about dying than actually dying itself. It
Which is the irony of that is amazing because
is, isn't
if you were
it?
dead, you wouldn't care. So
Yeah, there's a lot of irony, but that's the number one thing that kept me going. I would be extra safe about river crossings, for instance, interacting with very dangerous individuals. I'd be very cautious of that. And you do that through research, and by asking local people, how do you overcome these challenges? You do online research, you do whatever you can because knowledge is out there, knowledge is available for you, and that was my privilege, really.
yeah, no, absolutely, and that's a great lesson to everyone to do that, right? Because there is resources out there. You can, whatever it is, whatever journey, quote unquote, you're going on, is that's so important, and it's fascinating to hear that. That's something that's really kind of like a shock for me in those conversations where you're going through those villages and people are in that mindset of in that mindset of being subservient, or the slavery mindset that which evidently is still having a massive impact on the world today. Although we like to think it's evolved, and it has thankfully evolved somewhat. However, it's a very small amount of what needs to be done, in my opinion. And it's so fascinating that it can be so remote that that's still, like you said, people can't fathom it. People can't understand that somebody is free in the Western world and being able to go about that. And one of the questions I actually had written down, which kind of loops into this, was, did you come up against a lot of that, not the acceptance and what you'd maybe you'd expected, maybe you didn't expect it, but I could have maybe would have expected that to kind of go in there and just be accepted, and it sounds like maybe that wasn't the case.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I've gone through hundreds of different tribes, villages. There, like, Africa alone has over 4,000 different languages and tribes, and that's quite a lot, And the fact that we know nothing of any of them, from a mainstream point of view, is quite sad. And these languages are dying. The knowledge is dying with them, and this is the cradle of humanity. Um, and so I knew that there were going to be times where I probably wouldn't fit in certain communities. In some communities, I was looked at as a hero, and then within the same breath of, there's that one. I'll give an example. When I was in Mozambique, was a huge experience, and because I mention Mozambique quite often because it was, to me, kind of like the extremes of many things that happened. And when I first made it into Mozambique, I would say the second week I was on their TV channel on the news network, and it was a 7-minute segment about me, and I was like, oh, this is pretty intense. I thought it was just going to be like a quick 30-second like intro, but no, they did a 7-minute segment about me, and there are only like two news networks, and they were just blasting me everywhere, and I was just like, this is gonna be ridiculous. So I was instantly famous in a country that I never even thought of like 3 weeks prior to this, because I was supposed to go to to Zimbabwe and Zambia, and before that I never really thought of Mozambique, and now I'm like this hero in a sense, because what happened was I actually looked like their former president that freed Mozambique, that made Mozambique an independent country. And so they looked at him as a hero. And because I looked like him, I had a gap tooth and, the side of my mouth, and I had the beard. And so I always wore a hat, and he did exactly the same thing, right? And so I resembled him quite a lot. So people would stop me because they'd be like, "Oh, you look like the former president," or they would stop me because they saw me on the news. And there were times where I would be welcomed into villages where people would actually stop an entire like wedding going on, and
Jeez.
they would surround me. I have a video of this. It's incredible. They would surround me by the hundreds, and I'm not exaggerating at all. Like, we're talking people like wanting to kiss my hand. I had like a woman, she went on her knees to kiss my hand, and she wanted to bless it. Like, I had marriage proposal. It was like next level. You can't. So it's like, I could not have even fathomed this. And then about 2 days later, you're getting shot at by rebels who hate you. So it's like, so you gotta like give up the notion of expectation. you,
Yeah.
you just kind of walk into it with this kind of Buddhist mentality, which is like, let it be as it is, and enjoy every moment, as much as you can, even the harder moments, because you know that the hard moments are just going to be kind of short lived. And there are good people. I think the majority of people are good in general. It's just that I think fear, insecurities, and ignorance is the culprit to these things, where people do atrocious things. And I think there are obviously solutions to these.
Yeah, and a lot of what you're doing, Mario, is exactly that, right? Like you said, it's getting out there, it's connecting, and I'm sure you did your fair amount of educating, and just being there, being who you are, and coming from Canada, and your journey, just people seeing that and understanding that, and news networks and whatever it is, whatever you can get that word out there,
Yeah.
it's doing that work. It's doing that work of building, and that's why we're trying to, with our platform, is stretch across as many different, different backgrounds and different cultures, and different conversations about, maybe it's somebody's mental health disorder, maybe it's somebody's, has gone exploring, and just trying to get so people understand. Like, I've learned so much about, in an hour, I've learned so much about the differences and, the things that you've experienced, and so many other people are going to learn that too. And that's so important, because I agree with you. We can all contribute to that change, whatever that looks like. Not everyone's going to walk the length of Africa.
Mhm.
However, there's things that you can do, right? There's ways that you can contribute to that, to broadening the knowledge and the understanding. And as you said, sometimes it's in a good light, and sometimes you're getting shot at. So it just depends. But I'm not going to be going to Mozambique anytime soon, that's for sure. But I fancy getting shot at. But no, it's so true. And I love that kind of Buddhist mentality, that you referenced, and how you kind of just got to let it be what it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and let it just kind of be in it and be present with that, because there's going to be those times. And it's kind of, I guess it's a bit of a metaphor for life, in that we have to expect the unexpected, and
Absolutely.
it puts it as the best peace that we can be in. As far as I can see the world in nearly 40 years, I haven't done enough of that, and when I do it sets me off on the right path for that day or that week or that situation, or whatever it is. It's so valuable.
Yeah, I was introduced to a guy in Tanzania. He was a very traditional old man, and he came up to me, and for no reason, like I think he heard about my story, but he found it very important to come up to me, and he said, "Do you understand the importance of the state of flow?" And I thought to myself, like, "Whoa, this guy's like talking about flow and things like that." That's kind of what I was into, right? And he's saying that, yeah, it's not necessarily just like a Buddhist philosophy, but it's more like a traditional Eastern philosophy. And what he was telling me about was, he said, being in a state of flow, not with just yourself, but with everything that's around you, like your surroundings, the people around you. And it doesn't mean to just like go with the flow. It's not that term. And what it means really is being there in, at the like being present with everything that's around you, with your surroundings, with the universe, to the smallest thing to the largest thing. It's really an incredible place to be. And when someone doesn't have that feeling ever, or that state, then you're really missing the point of life, which is to essentially live it.
Yeah. Um, that is so true, and in so many, and wherever the philosophy is, wherever, whatever book or whatever person, so many of those philosophies, but it's so true. And I mentioned this, like, I recorded an episode earlier today, and in that episode we talked a lot about the kind of is being able to see the world for what it is, and being able to kind of be in that flow, or be in that that present state, and just accept everything for what it is. And we were actually discussing like suffering loops within, in regards to mental health, and how we get stuck in those kind of loops of suffering because we don't let ourselves, or because of what the learned behavior we've got, we don't let ourselves be joyful and happy. And it's just like you said, it's a process, and we all have to work on that. We've all got our stuff. So yeah, it's so powerful. So I have one more question that I'm dying to ask, um and I want to know, from my background, and obviously we met through the fitness industry, so how do you train to walk across Africa? I was like, I have to ask this before we finish. How do you train for that?
So it's really funny, because I started to tell people that I'm doing this thing, and 99% of people like drop me as their friend because they thought I was legitimately crazy. Like 99% of my friends said, "Yeah, all right, Mario, goodbye." Um, except for, there was a few, obviously, like, people that were like kind of pretending to support me, but then there were like a few people who actually really supported me. And this is my good friend Donna Foster. She's also in the fitness industry. So a lot of my friends who supported me actually were in the fitness industry, and she is an endurance a walking coach. So she does endurance training. And she reached out to me one day, and she said, "Hey Mario, why don't we do like a walk from Toronto to Montreal as a training, right? So I can train you, and not only that, but people would like feel that this is legitimately something that you're about to do, and you can get funding this way, right?" So I agreed, and she kicked my ass so hard. Oh my gosh. I mean, she's this like very petite little woman, and you wouldn't think that, like, I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, what's so bad about walking? And the longest I've ever walked was probably 3 hours. I've never gone beyond that time. And when we walked together, we would do stretches that went, I think, 21 hours.
Jesus.
And like, there were times where I was hallucinating, even she was hallucinating as well. We started like, it was just really intense. Like, I remember that I had massive chafing between my thighs because the underwear had rolled up a little bit, and it's just like, if it's rubbing against each
Yeah.
other. After 21 hours, like thousands of steps, that like chafing turned into like sharp knives, just like going through your skin. And it was just the most excruciating pain I have ever felt in my life. I couldn't feel my body, like, and then I could feel it at the same time. Like, I could feel the pain part of it, but I couldn't feel anything else. It was just like, I was basically like, like, if you could compile pain together and then create an object out of it, that's how my body felt. So, and she did that on purpose. She said, I wanted to break you down so that when you faced, like very, very challenging in Africa, you would be able to handle it, and you would know what to do. And so she taught me all the tricks I needed to know in order to do endurance training. And of course, it was just like, it took me 14 days to walk from Toronto to Montreal. but it was enough lessons for me to remember to take to Africa. And, I'll never forget that. And so, I did that for training. I also did a Toronto to Hamilton walk as well. So, put that all together, although it's not as much training as a lot of people think. I do a lot of crazy things. Like even last year, I kayaked the length of Lake Ontario, and I have, it was in a sit-in sea kayak, one of those like really tight,
Oh
small,
gosh.
athletic ones. And I've never been in one of those before. So, and the amount of time I had training was zero. I actually trained while I was doing it
Yeah.
because I started from Hamilton. I figured that by the time I got to Toronto, that'll be 2 or 3 days. That will be my training, and that will also tell me if I can continue or not. So, I kind of tend to dive into these things, and I don't really recommend that to people. I definitely recommend people to spend more time training and doing these things. But I really do understand my own body, and as as an athlete, my athletic background, I can really I have a fine sense of where my body's at and what it's capable of doing. So, don't take it as like I just had like 2 weeks of training, but think about all the things that I've done in the past. I've trained really fine tuning my body, and what the 2 weeks does for me in terms of training for walking or cycling or kayaking is just essentially like kind of fine like tweaking my training resume from my entire life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's exactly what I was just thinking then as well. Because it's sometimes it's perceived as that, right? Like a short, attempt at something new or doing something different or some sort of physical challenge, and people
Mhm.
sometimes forget the sets and reps, right? Like they forget that the years and years, like you said, being exploring as a kid and training for track and field and athletics. Like it's brutal, and it's the all those sets and reps and 5 a.m. training sessions that build that foundation, right? It's not like jumping into it in your 30s and doing something you've never done. However, do people do that and generally suffer very badly, so or worse, suffer worse. So yeah, that's super interesting for me to kind of trying to picture that kind of training. And yeah, definitely. We we actually, myself and Carl, who's the other host of Weir's, who who couldn't be here this evening, but we he made a decision one day that he wanted to do some stupid physical feat, and we wanted to walk, and he was going to try and walk 100 kilometers. We didn't make it 100 kilometers, but we did about 8 solid hours, about 40k. And yeah, I can that's a very small amount of what you did, and I can definitely
I
back
wish you
up
had
that.
called me for that, man. I would have totally come along with you guys on
I
that
know,
one.
right?
That's
Listen,
that's it. Yeah.
if we try to do it again in the future one day, you're gonna be the first person I call now. I'm gonna be like, so
Yeah, yeah. Please let me know.
listen, this has been an absolute pleasure. It's been cool just to hear your voice and catch up. It's been, as you mentioned, it's probably been about a decade
Oh yeah.
since we connected. So it's been awesome. So thank you so much for being on the show. If you have any kind of last thoughts, anything else you want to kind of throw out there for the listeners before I sign us off, please go ahead.
Yeah, Gareth, honestly, it's so refreshing to hear your voice again. It has been a decade. I can't believe it. So, it's almost like an echo from like a decade ago, which is great. A beautiful echo that is. But yeah, no, I just want to touch up people, upcoming expeditions. I have an expedition called the Caicos Challenge coming up in end of April or beginning of May, depending on COVID situations. So essentially what this is an expedition where I'm going to traverse the entire length of the Turks and Caicos Islands, which are 8 main islands spread throughout the Caribbean. And I'm going to attempt to be the first person to actually do this and record it. And the reason I'm doing this is to promote sustainable development and ecotourism in the Turks and Caicos Islands. And this will be divided between disciplines of running, kayaking, excuse me, running, kayaking, cycling, hiking, and what else? Running as well. So it's like kind of like combining all these expeditions together that I've done in the past and merging it with this one. And it's also going to be a community challenge. So even you can join this one. This is actually your time to do that 100 kilometer
Yeah.
because it's a global community challenge where we're going to get people to virtually connect with this expedition in real time. People can see my stats, like in terms of how many steps I'm taking, how many strokes I'm taking, distance. And we're going to have a leadership board on Strava where people can actually compare their efforts to mine. So when I'm doing 30-kilometer run on that day, then I challenge people around the world to do a similar feat where they do a 30-kilometer run or more or less. It doesn't really matter. Just essentially what it is you trying to perceive what it feels like to do an expedition with me.
Yeah. Oh my god, I love that. And we've got that's going to be in the show notes for everyone. I know there's a Facebook page on there and some more information, so everyone check that out. I am right here to thousands of people committing to being involved in that. So I just did it, so now I can't get out of it. And you all heard it. But yeah, I'm gonna look into that. I'd love to get involved, and maybe we can involve the podcast in that in some capacity too. That would be awesome. Listen, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I'm glad that you did not get shot by rebels in Mozambique, and we could have this conversation. So I truly appreciate it, and obviously we appreciate everybody listening. So thank you. Remember, subscribe if you enjoyed the episode. If you learned something, obviously go check out Mario. Check him out on social media. Get connected. Join in the challenge if it's something that appeals to you, and you can help make a difference, much like we spoke about this evening. Please share, subscribe, check us out on social media, do all the things you know what to do, help spread these conversations everywhere. And remember, be the best possible version of yourself you can be. Keep making a difference in the world, and we'll catch you on the next episode.